The ballroom glittered with wealth. Chandeliers sparkled above rows of polished glasses, and the hum of conversation filled the air. Donovan Hale stepped onto the stage, his tailored suit fitting like armour, his expression carved in confidence. This was his world, a charity gala where money moved silently through handshakes, where his name drew nods of respect. But none of it mattered the moment his eyes found hers. Celine. Time stopped. Donovan's voice caught in his throat, his speech slipping from memory. She stood near the back of the hall, framed by the soft glow of the lights. Her dress was simple yet elegant, her posture calm yet commanding. She looked stronger, more certain than when he last saw her. For years he had buried her face deep in memory, but now it came alive, sharper than any dream. What truly froze him, though, wasn't Celine's beauty. It was the two little girls clinging to her hands. Twins? They couldn't have been more than 5. Their hair was thick and curly, their eyes bright with mischief. One tugged at Celine's hand, while the other whispered something that made her mother smile. Donovan felt his chest seize, his breath grow shallow. The word he once spat out like venom, Barren, echoed in his ears. The insult he had used in anger, the word that had destroyed his marriage, stood before him proven false. Celine had children, not 1, but 2. The crowd around him blurred. Applause rang out, but he couldn't hear it. His hands trembled as his mind churned. Each second stretched into eternity as he watched the girls look up at Celine and call her a word he once thought she would never hear. Mommy. His throat tightened. For years he had lived untouchable, respected, and feared in boardrooms. But now, confronted with this truth, he felt stripped of power. The mighty CEO who had built empires suddenly felt like a man drowning in silence. He gripped the podium, searching for air. The speech he came to deliver, figures, pledges, promises, meant nothing. This moment rewrote everything he thought he knew about his past. He wanted to move, to walk toward her, but his legs refused. 1,000 questions screamed in his mind. Were they hers? Whose were they? Had she remarried? Why hadn't he known? The crowd's applause pulled him back, forcing him to mumble his way through the rest of his remarks. But his eyes never left Celine. He felt as though the entire room had disappeared, leaving only the 3 of them, the woman he once loved and the daughters he never knew existed. Inside, shame cut through him like glass. He remembered the night he let anger take over, the night he branded Celine with that cruel word. He had walked away, convinced she would never be a mother. Now the evidence of his failure stood in front of him, smiling, laughing, alive. When the event ended and guests poured into the corridors, Donovan's gaze followed Celine until she slipped from sight. He knew one thing with absolute certainty: his life had just changed. This was no ordinary reunion. It was a collision with the past he thought he left behind. The city stretched beneath him, glittering with neon signs and headlights that streamed like restless rivers. Donovan stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, hands shoved into his pockets, staring without seeing. From this height, he could command a view of everything: the banks he owned, the towers bearing his company's name, the wealth he had fought to build. Yet tonight, none of it gave him peace. The word echoed again, sharper than the glass that reflected his hollow face. Barren. He had hurled it years ago in anger, certain that it would wound Celine, certain it would end the fight they were having. He hadn't expected it to end them both. That single word had split their marriage apart like an earthquake, leaving a fault line no apology could mend. Now it roared inside his head, mocking him. The image of Celine at the gala, radiant and unshaken, replayed every time he blinked. Worse were the children. 2 little girls who looked at her with unconditional love. He pressed a hand against the cold glass. Hadn't he convinced himself she had vanished into silence? He thought she had faded into history, another chapter closed. But no, she had rebuilt. She had thrived. She had found life where he once declared none could exist. His reflections stared back at him. Donovan Hale, the man the press called unshakable, ruthless, untouchable. Yet the mask cracked here in the dark. He saw not a titan of finance, but a man afraid of the ghost he created. Memories gnawed at him. Their first apartment, with its leaky faucet and mismatched chairs. Celine laughed as she studied with him late into the night, her tired smile after another failed treatment, still hopeful, still trying. He had once sworn to protect that hope. Instead, he crushed it beneath his pride. Donovan rubbed his temple, pacing the polished floor. Money never bought him silence. It only bought distractions. He filled his days with meetings, his nights with women who admired his power, but none of them erased the shadows Celine left. Tonight, the shadow had returned in flesh and blood. 2 daughters who proved him wrong. For the first time in years, fear gripped him. Fear that Celine had built a life completely separate, that he no longer had a place in her world. Fear that he had lost the only person who ever saw him not as a CEO, but as a man. The city buzzed beneath him, unaware of the storm raging in his chest. Donovan closed his eyes, but the silence was worse. He heard Celine's voice, soft yet firm, the way she used to steady him after every failure. He heard his own voice, too, sharp and cruel, branding her with a word no man should ever throw at a woman. He poured himself a drink, but the burn of whiskey did nothing to blur the truth. He had been wrong, dead wrong. He pressed the glass down so hard it cracked against the marble counter. His hand trembled, though he hated to admit it. The man who prided himself on control was unravelling in the face of a reality he never prepared for. Celine had daughters, and he had none. The silence of the penthouse grew unbearable. Donovan turned from the window, pacing faster, restless as if the floor itself mocked him. All the trophies, the awards, the luxury furniture, meaningless. None of it could fill the void. His mind kept circling back to the way those little girls called her Mommy. He could almost hear their voices echoing through the walls of his empty home. The word Barren had once been his weapon. Now it was his punishment. Before Donovan Hale became the man whose signature sealed billion-dollar deals, he was simply a young dreamer. Back in college, he was a sharp, ambitious student with ideas bigger than his bank account. And beside him was Celine Ward, his anchor, his partner, the woman who believed in him when belief was all he had to offer. They built their love in cramped dorm rooms and late-night diners. She helped edit his business proposals while juggling her own studies. He promised her a future far brighter than the lives they were born into. When they married young, it felt less like a risk and more like destiny. For a while it was. Their first years as husband and wife were filled with laughter in small apartments, hand-me-down furniture, and long walks where they dreamed aloud of what life could be. Donovan chased success with ferocity, and Celine cheered every step. She was his balance, the calm voice reminding him that money wasn't the only measure of wealth. But time has a way of pressing on weak points. The weak point in their marriage was the silence of the nursery. Month after month, the crib stayed empty. Celine carried the weight of each failed attempt in her heart, and Donovan carried it like a shadow he couldn't shake. She tried everything. Doctors, treatments, whispered prayers in the dark. Donovan tried too, at first, but as his company grew, so did his distance. He buried himself in work, in deals, in late-night calls, convincing himself it was easier than watching Celine cry. The breaking point came one night after another argument, when exhaustion and pride collided. His words sliced through the air like a blade. Barren. He would never forget the way her face crumpled, not from anger, but from devastation. The word turned their marriage into ash. It wasn't simply a cruel insult, it was betrayal. It told her she was less. It told her she was unworthy. And from Donovan, the man who had once sworn to protect her, it was unforgivable. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Days turned into weeks, and eventually Celine packed what little she had left. She didn't leave a note, no address, no forwarding number. She disappeared, and Donovan let her go, burying himself deeper in his empire. Publicly, he thrived. His name climbed the ranks of financial magazines. His face appeared on covers. But privately, he carried the echo of that moment, the knowledge that his pride had cost him the only woman who had ever loved him without condition. Celine, meanwhile, walked into the unknown. She built a new life out of fragments, though Donovan never knew where. He convinced himself she had moved on, maybe remarried, maybe built a family elsewhere. Yet the question always lingered late at night. What if she was still alone? Now, at the gala, the answer stood before him. She hadn't been destroyed by his word. She had risen above it. She had created a life richer than anything he could buy. 2 little girls, proof that her story hadn't ended when he thought it had. Proof that love and hope could bloom even after betrayal. For Donovan, the revelation was more than shocking. It was a reminder of everything he had lost and everything he had thrown away. The silence of Donovan's penthouse was heavy, but the weight of his choices was heavier. He poured himself another drink and sat on the edge of the couch, his shoulders slumped for, perhaps the first time in his life. The man who commanded boardrooms with a single glance couldn't command his own memories. He thought of Celine's eyes at the gala, calm, untouchable, a woman who no longer needed him. He thought of the 2 little girls holding her hands, secure in a love he had once denied her. For years, he told himself power came from wealth. Yet tonight proved him wrong. Real power was in the bond between Celine and her daughters. Real wealth was the joy written on her face as they called her Mummy. Donovan leaned back, the word Barren echoing louder than the hum of the city below. He remembered the anger, the sharpness of his tongue, the way he lashed out instead of listening. That word had driven her away. That word had cost him everything. Viewers, have you ever said something you wished you could take back? One word, spoken in anger, that scarred someone you loved? If you have, then you know why Donovan feels hollow now. If not, then listen closely, because this story holds a lesson too many learn too late. We share stories like this because they remind us of something deeper. Words matter. Choices matter. Pride has consequences. And sometimes, the people we push away are the very people who carried us when no one else would. Before we continue, let me pause here to ask you something. If this story speaks to you, if it stirs something inside you, do me a favor. Support this channel. Press that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe right now. It costs nothing, but it keeps these powerful stories alive. Stories that carry truth and life lessons. Because what you've seen so far, this is only the beginning. Donovan has only tasted the first drop of what's to come. The real storm is ahead. At the gala, he froze. In his penthouse, he replayed the past. But soon, he will face Celine directly. He will hear her voice, see her strength, and feel the wall she has built between them. And he will realize that not all doors open again, even when you knock with regret. But for now, take this moment with me. Reflect. If you've ever been on either side of a broken promise, you know how fragile love can be. You know the pain of silence. And you know the ache of wishing for one more chance. Donovan is about to find out what happens when the past he abandoned comes back, holding his future in small hands. The gala was ending, but for Donovan Hale, the night had only begun. Guests filed out with laughter and champagne, their chatter fading into the corridors. Donovan barely noticed them. His focus remained locked on the woman who once carried his last name. Celine moved with quiet grace, her daughters at her side. Nova tugged at her hand, asking questions too soft for him to hear. Nia clutched a small stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide as she studied the crowd. They looked safe, happy, untouched by the chaos of the man who once walked out on their mother. Donovan stood frozen near the stage, his pulse thundering louder than the applause had minutes ago. Every instinct in him wanted to close the distance, to call out her name. Yet fear held him still. Fear of her rejection. Fear of the truth. What would he say? How could he explain the word that broke her, the silence that followed? The years he spent building walls of money while she built a life without him. He tightened his jaw, watching as Celine reached for her coat. She looked radiant, but not for him. She was radiant for herself, for the family she had created, for the children who gave her reasons to keep going when he had left her behind. Donovan's world shifted in that moment. All the deals he signed, all the accolades he earned, felt weightless compared to the weight of two small hands in hers. He whispered to himself, almost like a confession, "They're hers. They're really hers." But the questions pressed harder. Were they only hers? Did they carry blood he dared not claim? The truth burned inside him. He needed to know. Celine turned, her gaze sweeping briefly across the room. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Donovan felt his chest seize. The air left his lungs as if she had pulled it away. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. Her face was calm, unreadable. And then she looked away. It was a look that told him she had closed a chapter long ago. Donovan clenched his fists. No, he couldn't let it end like this. Not tonight. He took a step forward, determination stirring beneath the shame. This was no longer about pride or wealth. It was about the one woman he broke and the life she built beyond him. Viewers, stay with me, because in the next part of this story, Donovan will do what he never imagined he'd have to. Stand before Celine again, stripped of excuses, desperate for answers. Will she give him a chance to speak? Or will she guard the daughters he longs to know with the same fire that once guarded her heart? This isn't just a reunion, it's a reckoning, and it begins the moment he whispers her name. Long before Donovan Hale became a headline in financial magazines, he was simply a young man with more ambition than money. At university, he was known for his sharp mind, his endless drive, and his ability to charm professors into giving him extensions. But his success was far from guaranteed. Behind the polished speeches and confident posture, he carried the weight of being a dreamer with no safety net. That was when Celine Ward stepped into his life. She wasn't impressed by his charm or the swagger he carried into lecture halls. What drew her was his determination, the way he refused to give up, even when his plans seemed impossible. She had her own goals, to build a stable career, to create a life filled with meaning. Together, they were a pair of visionaries, pushing each other forward when the world expected them to fail. Their relationship grew in the most ordinary places: crowded libraries, late-night diners and walks. Across campus, where they spoke of the future as if it were a canvas waiting for their signatures. Donovan promised her a world where money would no longer be a barrier. Celine promised to be the partner who kept him grounded, who reminded him of the value of kindness when ambition threatened to swallow him whole. When they married soon after graduation, it wasn't about wealth or status. Their wedding was small, attended by friends who cheered them on as if they had conquered the world already. They lived in a modest apartment with a leaky faucet, and walls so thin they could hear their neighbours' arguments. Yet to them it was enough. Donovan was building his first company from scratch, working day and night. Celine balanced her own career with supporting him, editing his proposals, cooking meals when money was tight, and reminding him to sleep when exhaustion made him forget. For a time, their love was untouchable. They didn't need luxury cars or designer clothes. They needed each other. Donovan saw Celine as his anchor, the person who steadied him when the chaos of business threatened to pull him under. And Celine believed in Donovan more than he believed in himself. She often told him, "We'll make it, because we have love, and that's enough." But as the years passed, their dreams began to shift. Donovan's business grew rapidly, and with growth came pressure. Investors demanded results. Clients wanted constant attention. Success required more of his time, more of his focus, and little by little he began to miss the quiet dinners, the long walks, the laughter they once shared. For Celine, the pressure came in a different form. They wanted a family, or rather, she did, and he claimed he did too, month after month, year after year. Disappointment replaced hope. Doctors offered vague reassurances, treatments promised possibilities, but nothing changed. Celine carried the pain in silence, hiding her tears so Donovan wouldn't see her break. She told herself she had to be strong, that if she faltered, the weight of their struggle would crush them both. But Donovan noticed, and instead of holding her closer, he threw himself deeper into work. Every business victory was a distraction from the emptiness at home. He convinced himself that success would fill the cracks forming between them. He told himself he was building a future that would one day heal the wounds they carried. Yet the nursery remained empty. The crib they bought too early gathered dust. The silence of the room became heavier with each passing year, and though Celine smiled through it, the strain etched itself into her heart. Their love, once effortless, began to feel like labour. Arguments replaced laughter. Long silences stretched across the dinner table, and still Celine held on, believing that the man she loved was still buried beneath the ambition and the pride. Donovan, however, let pride win. The night that shattered everything came after yet another argument, one that began small, about missed dinners and forgotten promises, but escalated into something neither of them could stop. Words flew like weapons. Celine, exhausted from years of hope and heartbreak, accused him of abandoning her emotionally. Donovan, cornered by his own frustration and shame, lashed out with the word that would end their marriage. Barren. The room fell silent. The insult landed with more force than any shout could. Celine froze, her breath caught, her eyes filling with a hurt deeper than he had ever seen. It wasn't anger that showed on her face, it was devastation. In that single moment, she no longer saw a husband. She saw a man who had chosen cruelty over love. Donovan realized what he had done the instant the word left his lips, but pride kept him from taking it back. Pride told him to stand firm, to let the silence cover his mistake. But deep down, a voice whispered that he had just destroyed the one thing in his life worth protecting. Celine turned away. She didn't cry, not then. She simply walked into their bedroom, shut the door, and left him alone with the echo of his own cruelty. For Donovan, the victory of having the last word felt like defeat. He had broken the woman who once believed he was capable of anything. That night marked the beginning of the end. The morning after the word was spoken, the apartment felt colder than winter. Donovan woke to silence, a silence so thick it pressed against his chest. The door to their bedroom was closed, and for the first time in years he hesitated before knocking. When Celine finally emerged, her eyes were swollen, though no tears fell in front of him. She moved quietly, deliberately, as if every step required strength. She didn't raise her voice, didn't confront him with anger. Instead, she carried herself with the calmness of someone who had made a decision. Donovan wanted to speak, to apologize, but pride locked his tongue. He told himself it had been a moment of weakness, that Celine knew he hadn't meant it. But deep down, he knew she had. Words spoken in anger still revealed truths buried in pride, and she knew that too. Days passed, and their routine became hollow. Donovan left earlier for work, returned later at night. Celine stopped waiting up for him. Meals went untouched, conversations went unspoken. The apartment that once held laughter and whispered plans now carried only silence. Celine continued her treatments for a while, but without Donovan's support, the weight grew unbearable. Sitting in waiting rooms alone, she realized that her battle wasn't with infertility alone. It was with a marriage that no longer gave her hope. The final fracture came one evening when Donovan returned home to find Celine standing by the window, a small suitcase at her feet. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She simply looked at him, her voice steady but heavy with finality. "I can't do this anymore, Donovan. I won't let one word define me, but I also won't stay with a man who used it against me." He froze, searching for the right words, but nothing came. He wanted to stop her, to say she was still his world, but his pride and shame tangled together, leaving him speechless. She picked up her suitcase, walked to the door, and without another word, she left. Donovan didn't chase her. He told himself she needed space, that she would return once the anger faded. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, he realized she wasn't coming back. There was no letter, no phone call, not even a whisper of where she had gone. It was as if she had erased herself from his life completely. He searched half-heartedly at first, asking mutual friends if they had heard from her. Most shrugged, some looked at him with quiet judgment, and one finally told him bluntly, "You broke her, Donovan. What did you expect?" So he buried himself in his work. The empire he had been building became his obsession. Deals, acquisitions, long hours at the office, anything to drown out the emptiness of coming home to an apartment stripped of Celine's presence. But no amount of wealth filled the void. Success became his drug, numbing the ache but never curing it. Behind the tailored suits and polished speeches was a man who had lost the only person who loved him without condition. Celine, meanwhile, disappeared into silence. She didn't tell him where she was going, and he never truly tried to find out. Pride whispered that if she wanted to leave, he wouldn't beg. Pride told him he had been the one wronged, that her absence was her choice. But in the quiet of his penthouse years later, he would admit the truth to himself. She left because he gave her no reason to stay. Their marriage, once built on hope and promise, had collapsed under the weight of one word. And though Donovan told himself he had moved on, the truth was unavoidable. No amount of money or power erased the image of Celine's face the night he called her Barren. That scar remained. It remained in every silent evening. It remained in every empty glass he poured. It remained in the hollowness of success when no one waited at home. And it remained until the night fate placed Celine back in front of him, radiant and unbroken, with two daughters who proved he had been wrong all along. Her twins. When Celine left Donovan, she carried little more than her dignity and the quiet determination to survive. She didn't run away with a plan. She simply knew she could not stay where her spirit had been crushed. Her suitcase held a few clothes, some savings she had managed to hide away, and the hope that distance would heal what time had failed to mend. She moved to another city, far enough that no mutual acquaintances would casually cross her path. The first months were the hardest. Loneliness settled in quickly, whispering questions that kept her awake at night. Had she made the right choice? Could she build a life alone, without the man she had once believed was her future? Celine found work in a hospital administration office, starting at the bottom. The pay wasn't glamorous, and the hours were long, but the environment gave her structure. The routine became a shield against despair. Filing paperwork, answering phones, balancing schedules, simple tasks, but they gave her something Donovan never could: peace. In her new world, no one knew her as the wife who couldn't conceive. She was Celine Ward, an efficient, hard-working professional who earned respect through consistency and kindness. She poured herself into the job, and in time her supervisors noticed. Promotions came slowly, but they came. The little apartment she rented began to feel like a home, filled with second-hand furniture and potted plants she kept alive with care. Yet even as she pieced her life together, the ache remained. She passed playgrounds and felt a hollow tug in her chest. She smiled at colleagues who spoke of their children, but swallowed the lump in her throat afterward. The word Donovan had used haunted her, not because she believed it anymore, but because it had been the weapon he chose to wound her with. Still, Celine refused to let that word define her. She read books on self-growth, attended counselling sessions quietly, and leaned into faith when her strength faltered. Slowly, she built herself back up, brick by brick. She learned to laugh again, to sit in a cafe with a book and enjoy her own company, to find joy in small routines. It was during one of those years of rebuilding that life surprised her. A close friend she had made at the hospital suggested she see a specialist, not because she still clung desperately to the dream of children she had long told herself it was enough to live fully without them, but because she wanted closure. She wanted to know if the door was truly closed, or if hope was still alive somewhere within her. The appointment was quiet, clinical, almost routine, but the doctor's words shifted everything. There was still a chance, not a guarantee, not even a strong likelihood, but a chance. Celine wrestled with the decision for weeks. She had built her life on acceptance, on letting go of what had once consumed her. To open that door again felt dangerous, like risking her heart all over, but something inside her urged her forward. Months of cautious treatments followed. They weren't easy. She faced side effects, moments of doubt, and nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was foolish to try again. Yet through it all, she carried herself with quiet resilience. This time she wasn't fighting to prove something to a husband or a marriage. She was fighting for herself. The day she held the test results in her hands, she sat on the edge of her bed, her body trembling. She was pregnant. Tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow but of triumph. After years of despair, after walking through the valley of shame and silence, her body had carried life. She whispered to herself through her sobs, "I am not barren. I never was." That whisper became her anthem. When the months passed and she learned she was carrying twins, she laughed through her tears. It felt like the universe itself was rewriting her story, replacing pain with abundance, replacing emptiness with two beating hearts. Pregnancy reshaped Celine's world. Each appointment brought new emotions, new anxieties, and new hope. She lived carefully, protecting not only her body, but her spirit. For the first time in years, she wasn't defined by what she lacked. She was defined by what she carried. The early months were filled with nausea and fatigue, but she faced them with determination. She kept working at the hospital, supported quietly by colleagues who admired her resilience. They didn't know her full story. She never spoke of Donovan, never spoke of the word that once branded her. To them she was simply Celine, strong, capable, expectant. When the time came for her first ultrasound, she lay on the exam table with her hands clenched. The doctor smiled as the screen flickered. "There are 2 heartbeats," he said. "You're having twins." Celine laughed and cried at the same time, her chest heaving with emotions too big to contain. 2. Life had not only answered her prayers, it had doubled them. In that moment, she felt redeemed. What once felt like the end of her story had become a beginning. She prepared her small apartment with care. A friend from work helped her find 2 second-hand cribs. Another donated clothes her own children had outgrown. Every detail mattered, from painting the walls a soft yellow to folding tiny onesies neatly into drawers. She had no partner to share the load, but she had a village of kindness around her. The day her daughters arrived was both exhausting and exhilarating. Hours of labour left her trembling, but when the nurse placed the first baby in her arms, Celine's breath caught. Nova, the elder by minutes, cried with a bold, strong voice that filled the room. Moments later, Nia followed, quieter, her tiny fingers curling instinctively around Celine's. Celine gazed down at them through tears that blurred her vision. They were beautiful, not because of their features, but because of what they represented. They were her victory, her proof that despair could give birth to joy. She kissed each forehead and whispered, "You are my miracles." Motherhood was not easy. Nights blurred into days as she fed, changed, and rocked her babies to sleep. She went to work exhausted, her body aching, her mind stretched thin. Yet every sacrifice felt worth it. When Nova giggled for the first time, or when Nia reached for her cheek, Celine felt a joy that erased every painful memory. She learned the art of balance. She carried them in slings to the market, managed late-night feedings with lullabies, and found peace in simple routines. On weekends she pushed their stroller through the park, smiling as strangers stopped to admire her daughters. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't feel broken. She felt whole. Celine also found herself again. She was no longer the woman defined by a failed marriage or cruel words. She was a mother raising 2 strong, beautiful girls. Nova, bold and curious, constantly challenged the world around her. Nia, thoughtful and gentle, mirrored Celine's younger self, observant, cautious, yet deeply compassionate. Together, they gave her purpose. Each laugh, each step, each milestone filled her heart with gratitude. In their eyes, she wasn't a woman who had been left behind. She was Mummy, the centre of their world, the one who gave them love without limits. Years passed quietly, but not without meaning. Celine advanced in her career, earning respect in her field, while balancing motherhood with grace. Her daughters grew into bright, lively children who filled their home with joy. Celine's life was not one of wealth or glamour, but it was rich in the ways that mattered. Every time she tucked Nova and Nia into bed, she thought of the word that once scarred her. And each time she smiled, because her daughters were living proof that it had never been true. Celine had rewritten her story, not with revenge, not with bitterness, but with love. Donovan Hale's name became a symbol of ambition fulfilled. By the time he reached his mid-30s, his company had grown into a financial powerhouse. His face appeared on magazine covers with headlines that praised his vision, his sharp instincts, his ability to turn risks into fortune. He walked into meetings and commanded attention. Investors leaned forward. When he spoke, and rivals stepped aside when he made his moves, on paper, he had everything. A penthouse that overlooked the city skyline, cars in his garage that most men only saw in advertisements, access to the finest restaurants, the most exclusive clubs, the circles of influence where decisions shaped markets. He had built the empire he once promised Celine, but success, when measured in numbers alone, proved hollow. At night, Donovan returned to an apartment that was silent. The walls echoed only with the hum of city traffic below. There were no shoes by the door except his own, No soft laughter in the kitchen, no voice asking how his day had been. He filled the space with modern furniture, abstract art, and expensive wines, but the rooms felt sterile. No matter how much he bought, they carried no warmth. Relationships came and went. Women were drawn to him, fascinated by his wealth and power, but the connections never lasted. Donovan entertained them at dinners, gifted them jewelry, even flew them across oceans for vacations. But when the excitement faded, so did they. None of them touched the core of him. None of them knew him the way Celine once did. Every so often, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, memories returned. The sound of Celine's laughter as she quizzed him before exams, the way she leaned into him during long walks when life felt uncertain, the look in her eyes the night he wounded her with one word. He tried to push these memories away, bury them under contracts and headlines, but they returned relentless. He told himself he didn't miss her, only the comfort she represented. But deep down, he knew the truth. Celine had been the only person who saw him as more than ambition. With her, he had been human. Without her, he was only a machine built for profit. Even his victories tasted bitter. The day his company went public should have been triumphant. Cameras flashed, champagne corks popped, and the market celebrated his genius. Yet, as Donovan stood on the balcony of the stock exchange, watching his employees cheer, he felt an ache in his chest. The one person who should have been there, the woman who had believed in him when no one else did, wasn't. He had driven her away. His friends noticed the void, though they never said it aloud. They saw the way he lingered in conversations whenever marriage or children came up. They noticed his hesitation whenever families attended corporate gatherings. Donovan deflected with humour, burying the unease under charm, but inside the emptiness deepened. Pride kept him from searching for Celine. Pride told him she was gone for good, that she had chosen her path, and he had chosen his. Still, he wondered, where was she? Did she find someone else? Had she built a family? Was she happy? He buried those questions beneath his routine. Work, meetings, deals, repeat. But no matter how many zeros appeared on his bank statements, the answers he longed for never came. Then came the charity gala, another event, another stage, another chance to showcase his success to the city's elite. Donovan prepared for it, as he always did, rehearsing his speech, perfecting his appearance, ensuring the evening would add to his reputation. What he didn't prepare for was fate. Because when his eyes found Celine in the crowd, holding the hands of two little girls, everything he thought he knew about his past and his future shattered in an instant. The ballroom of the Langford Hotel glowed with polished marble floors and chandeliers that showered light across the guests. This was the kind of night Donovan Hale mastered, an evening where power mingled with wealth, where his presence was both expected and admired. His speech was prepared, his suit was flawless, and his smile carried the ease of a man who knew how to command a room. But the moment he stepped onto the stage, his world tilted. There she was, Celine. Donovan's throat tightened as his eyes locked on her near the back of the room. She hadn't aged into bitterness as he feared she might. No, she looked radiant, even stronger than he remembered. Her dress was simple yet elegant, her posture confident. She wasn't the fragile woman he had last seen packing a suitcase. She was someone reborn, someone untouchable. And then he saw them, the two little girls clutching her hands. For a moment, Donovan thought his eyes were playing tricks. But the truth stood clear. Twins, both no older than 5 or 6, both with bright eyes and soft curls. One tugged at Celine's arm, whispering something that made her smile. The other studied the stage curiously, her gaze lingering on Donovan before darting back to her mother. Donovan's grip on the podium faltered. He had rehearsed his speech to perfection, yet not a single word came to mind. All he could hear was the echo of the insult he once hurled at Celine. Barren. That cruel word that shattered their marriage now mocked him in front of the crowd, disproven by the daughters standing proudly at her side. Applause filled the ballroom, but it reached him like a distant hum. He stumbled through his speech, the words mechanical, hollow. He barely noticed when the audience clapped at the end. His eyes never left Celine. She didn't look at him with longing or regret. She didn't look away in shame. Her expression was steady, calm, almost defiant. The message was clear. She no longer needed him. The gala continued, waiters weaving through with trays of champagne, music filling the air, conversations flowing around him. Donovan moved mechanically, shaking hands, nodding at compliments, but his attention was anchored to Celine. Every step she took, every smile she gave her daughters, carved into him. He finally saw her slip out of the hall, the twins tugging at her hands. Without thinking, Donovan followed. Outside, the night was cool, the street lamps glowing softly against the sidewalk. Celine stood adjusting one of her daughter's coats, while the other hummed to herself. For a brief moment, Donovan simply watched, his chest rising and falling heavily. This was the family he once told her she would never have, and yet here they were, alive and beautiful. Summoning the courage he had lost years ago, he stepped closer. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Celine?" Her head turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. They were the same eyes that once looked at him with love, then with pain. Now they looked at him with a guarded strength he had never seen before. The girls instinctively pressed closer to her sides, small hands tightening around hers. Donovan swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he gestured toward them. "Are they?" Celine's answer was immediate, steady, and final. "They're mine. That's all you need to know." Her words sliced through him with precision. Not angry, not bitter, but resolute. She shielded her daughters not with anger, but with quiet power. A clear boundary he couldn't cross. Donovan wanted to ask more. He wanted to know their names, their birthdays, every detail of their lives. But the way Celine shifted slightly, placing herself between him and the girls, told him everything. He had lost the right to ask. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken history. Finally, Celine turned, guiding her daughters away, her coat billowing gently in the night air. The girls' laughter echoed as they skipped toward the car, their innocence untouched by the tension simmering between the adults. Donovan stood frozen, his hands clenched, his chest aching. He had faced ruthless rivals and conquered impossible odds in business, yet tonight he had never felt weaker. For the first time in years, he realized money couldn't buy him what he wanted most, a place in Celine's world. And yet, as he watched her drive away, one truth pressed against his heart: he couldn't stay away. The night air clung to Donovan's skin long after Celine's car had disappeared into the dark. He stood on the curb, with the sound of her daughter's laughter echoing in his head. He had faced countless opponents in boardrooms, each fight sharpening his instincts, but nothing had prepared him for this. Seeing Celine whole, unbroken and shielded by the family he once swore she would never have. For days, he replayed the moment. Her steady eyes, the finality in her voice, "They're mine. That's all you need to know." It wasn't anger that struck him hardest. It was the calm certainty, the way she closed the door on his questions with a single sentence. Donovan couldn't let it end there. 3 nights later, he found himself outside the modest neighborhood where she now lived. It wasn't a mansion or a penthouse. It was a small, tidy house with a garden out front, toys scattered across the porch, and a soft glow spilling from the living room window. He sat in his car for nearly an hour, wrestling with himself. What right did he have to intrude? But every time he thought of turning the key in the ignition, he remembered the way the little girl had looked at him in curiosity. Finally, he stepped out. When Celine opened the door and saw him standing there, her eyes narrowed, her hand tightening on the doorknob. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low, careful not to wake the girls. "I had to see you," Donovan replied. His voice, usually smooth and commanding, trembled. "I can't stop thinking about what I saw at the gala, about them." Celine crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "What you saw was my life, a life I built without you, a life you have no place in." Her words hit like a hammer, but Donovan pressed on. "I know I don't deserve to ask. I know I ruined everything. But Celine, are they?" Her eyes flashed. Don't you dare try to claim them now. You lost that right the night you called me something no woman should ever hear from her husband. You don't get to show up years later and demand answers." Donovan's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the truth stood in her voice. She was right. Still, he couldn't walk away. "I'm not here to buy my way back," he said quietly. "I don't care about pride or appearances anymore. I need to be near them, even if it's from a distance." Celine studied him for a long moment. He looked different, not in appearance, but in the way his shoulders sagged, in the vulnerability bleeding through his words. The Donovan she once knew would never have admitted weakness, but memories still burned in her chest. The nights she cried alone, the shame she carried because of him, the years she spent piecing her life together without his support. Forgiveness, even if possible, would not come easily. "You can't erase what you did," she said finally, "and you can't walk in now and expect me to open the door just because you're ready. I have daughters to protect. That's my only responsibility." "I understand," Donovan whispered. His eyes glistened, his voice breaking in a way Celine had never heard before. "But please, let me prove I can be different. Not for us, if you don't want that. For them." Her arms loosened, but only slightly. She thought of Nova's boldness, Nia's gentleness. They had asked questions after the gala about the tall man who looked at them like he knew them. She had deflected, but she knew curiosity would only grow. Celine sighed, her voice weary but firm. "If you're serious, then understand this. You will not waltz in and buy their love with gifts. You will not disrupt their stability. You will show up consistently, humbly, without excuses. And the moment I feel you're doing this for yourself instead of for them, you're gone. Do you hear me?" Donovan nodded quickly, almost desperately. "I hear you, and I'll prove it, whatever it takes." The tension between them was thick, but beneath it, something else flickered. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of change. Celine stepped back, her hand still on the door. "We'll start small. Visits, that's all. Don't think this means anything more." Donovan exhaled, relief washing over him even in the coldness of her tone. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. It was a crack in the wall he thought was unbreakable. As the door closed behind her, Donovan stood on the porch, his heart pounding. He knew the road ahead would be long, filled with mistrust and hard truths. But for the first time in years, he felt purpose beyond profit. He wasn't fighting for an empire anymore. He was fighting for the chance to be a man his daughters could one day call father. The first visit came on a Saturday afternoon. Donovan arrived empty-handed, resisting the urge to show up with gifts. Every instinct told him to buy his way in. Toys, clothes, anything that might impress the twins. But Celine's warning echoed in his mind. You will not waltz in and buy their love. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding harder than it ever had before a board meeting. When Celine opened it, she didn't step aside immediately. Her eyes scanned him as though she were weighing not just his intentions, but his soul. "They're in the living room," she said flatly. "Don't make promises you can't keep." Donovan nodded, swallowing hard. He stepped inside a home that looked nothing like the world he lived in. The furniture was modest, worn from use, but full of life. Crayon drawings hung on the fridge. A pair of tiny shoes rested by the door. It wasn't wealth that filled the space, it was warmth. In the living room, the girls sat on the floor, surrounded by colouring books. Nova looked up first, bold and curious. Nia followed, quieter, her wide eyes studying him carefully. Celine spoke gently to them. "Girls, this is Mr. Hale. He's an old friend." Donovan's chest tightened at the word friend. He wanted more, but he accepted it. He knelt to their level, his expensive suit creasing as his knees touched the carpet. "Hello," he said softly. "I've heard you like stories." Nova grinned. "I like puzzles better. Can you help me?" She pushed a half-finished puzzle toward him. Donovan hesitated, then smiled. "I'll try." For the next hour, he fumbled with puzzle pieces under Nova's sharp instructions, while Nia watched silently, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Celine stood nearby, arms crossed, her eyes never leaving him. She expected him to falter, to retreat when the girls lost interest. But Donovan stayed. When Nova giggled at his clumsy attempt to force a piece into the wrong spot, something inside him broke open. It was the sound of innocence, a sound he hadn't realized he'd missed. He laughed, too, not the polished laugh he used at galas, but a raw, unguarded laugh he hadn't known was still in him. As the afternoon faded, Celine cleared her throat. "That's enough for today." Donovan rose reluctantly, brushing dust from his trousers. "Thank you," he said quietly, not to Celine, but to the girls. "I had fun." Nova waved, already pulling her sister back to the puzzle. Nia whispered something too soft for him to hear. When he reached the door, Celine followed. Her voice was low, sharp. "Don't confuse their curiosity with acceptance. They're children. They don't know the man you were." Donovan met her gaze. "Then let me show them the man I'm trying to be." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't reply. Instead, she closed the door, leaving him on the porch with hope flickering faintly in his chest. The visits continued, sometimes short, sometimes awkward. Donovan resisted the urge to rush the process, to push for more. Instead, he listened. He listened to Nova chatter about school, to Nia describe her favourite stories, to Celine's instructions about bedtime routines and boundaries. Slowly, the girls began to warm to him. Nova started asking when he would visit again. Nia began offering him crayons during colouring sessions. Celine noticed, and though it worried her, she didn't stop it. At night, Donovan returned to his penthouse, the silence less suffocating than before. He no longer drowned himself in whiskey or empty company. Instead, he replayed the girls' laughter, their questions, the way their eyes lit up over simple things. For the first time in years, he felt alive in a way no contract or deal had ever made him feel. But Celine remained guarded. She allowed the visits, but her walls stood tall. She reminded herself daily that Donovan had once broken her beyond repair. She told herself not to trust the change she saw in him. Yet even she couldn't ignore one truth. He kept showing up. No excuses, no grand gestures, just presence. And presence, she realized, was something she hadn't seen from him before. The weeks that followed tested Donovan's patience in ways business never had. In a boardroom, results came fast. A signed contract, a closed deal. But here, in Celine's living room, progress was measured in the smallest gestures. He arrived every weekend, sometimes on weeknights when Celine allowed. He brought no gifts, no flashy distractions. Instead, he brought himself, awkward, uncertain, but present. At first, the girls treated him like a guest, curious but distant. But slowly, their walls softened. One evening, Nova marched over with her hairbrush in hand. "Can you braid my hair?" she asked, her grin daring him to refuse. Donovan froze. "I've never done that before." "Try," she insisted, plopping onto the floor in front of him. Celine, folding laundry nearby, raised a brow but said nothing. She watched as Donovan fumbled with sections of hair, his large hands clumsy. Nova giggled every time he twisted the strands wrong. "That's not it," she shouted between laughs. He chuckled, frustrated but determined. All right, one more time." After several failed attempts, he finally managed a lopsided braid. Nova touched it proudly. "See? Not bad." Donovan exhaled in relief, wiping sweat from his forehead. Celine couldn't stop the small smile tugging at her lips. For a man who once measured worth in numbers, here he was celebrating a crooked braid as if it were a trophy. Another day, Nia sat with her puzzle spread across the coffee table. She was quieter than her sister, more cautious, and often watched from the background. But this time, when Donovan entered, she patted the empty space beside her. "Help," she whispered. He sat down carefully, humbled by the invitation. Together they fit the pieces, her small hand guiding his. She didn't laugh at his mistakes like Nova did. Instead, she offered soft corrections, her patience surprising him. When they completed the puzzle, she leaned her head lightly against his arm. That simple gesture undid him. His throat tightened as he whispered, "Thank you, sweetheart." Celine noticed. She always noticed. She tried to stay detached, to remind herself this man had once abandoned her when she needed him most. But the evidence was undeniable. He wasn't flashing wealth or making empty promises. He was showing up every single time. One night, after the girls were tucked in, Celine found Donovan still sitting on the porch. The air was crisp, the quiet broken only by the hum of crickets. He looked up when she stepped outside, his expression weary but softer than she remembered. "You didn't have to stay," she said cautiously. "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to. I like being here. With them. With you." Her chest tightened. She should have shut the door, reminded him of the years of pain, the nights she cried alone. But instead, she leaned against the railing, her eyes searching his. "You're trying," she admitted. "I see that." He nodded slowly. "It's all I know how to do now. I can't change the past, Celine, but I can show you who I am today." For a long moment, neither spoke. The porch light cast soft shadows across their faces, and the silence between them wasn't hostile anymore. It was heavy with memories, with wounds, but also with the faintest hint of possibility. When Donovan finally stood to leave, Celine didn't stop him. But as he walked down the steps, she realized something she hadn't expected. For the first time in years, she didn't feel anger when she looked at him. She felt cautious peace, and though she wouldn't admit it aloud, the peace scared her more than her resentment ever had. The porch had become their unspoken meeting place. After the girls went to bed, Donovan often lingered outside, reluctant to return to the emptiness of his penthouse. Celine didn't always join him, but when she did, their conversations stretched. Into the night, quiet, tense at times, but slowly loosening with honesty. One evening the air was warm, filled with the sound of cicadas humming in the trees. Celine stepped outside with 2 mugs of tea, setting one down in front of Donovan before taking the chair opposite him. She didn't say much at first, only sipped quietly, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon. Donovan broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder how different things could have been?" Celine's gaze didn't shift. "All the time. But wondering doesn't change what happened." He nodded, guilt pressing heavily on his chest. I replay that night more than I replay any business decision I've ever made. One word, and I destroyed us. Celine's jaw tightened, her fingers curling around her mug. You didn't just destroy us, Donovan. You destroyed me. You made me believe I was less. You left me to carry that weight alone. Her voice cracked slightly, and Donovan felt the sting of tears he rarely let himself show. I know, and I will never forgive myself for it. I thought strength meant control. I thought success would make up for my failures as a man. But the truth is, I was a coward. I hurt you because I was too afraid to face my own weakness. For a long moment, the only sound was the rustle of leaves in the wind. Celine stared at him, her eyes glistening. She had imagined this apology countless times over the years, wondered if it would ever come. Hearing it now, raw and unpolished, stirred something deep inside her. I waited for those words, she whispered, not because I wanted you back, but because I needed to know you understood the damage you caused. Donovan leaned forward, his hands trembling as they rested on his knees. I understand, and I'm not asking for forgiveness as if it's something I deserve. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I'm not the same man I was. Celine studied him carefully. His eyes, once filled only with ambition, now held humility. For the first time in years, she didn't see the ruthless CEO. She saw the man she had once loved, broken but trying. Her hand rested unconsciously on the arm of her chair. Donovan hesitated, then slowly reached across the small table, his fingers brushing against hers. She didn't pull away. Their hands lingered together, tentative but warm. The touch unlocked memories neither had spoken aloud. Nights in their tiny apartment, curled up on a couch too small for them both. Walks across campus when their future was nothing more than hope. The laughter, the closeness, the love that had once felt unshakable. Tears welled in Celine's eyes, not from pain this time, but from the realization. That part of her still remembered what it felt like to be cherished by him. You hurt me in ways I can't erase, she said softly. But I see you trying, and that matters more than you know. Donovan's chest swelled with relief, but he didn't push. He only nodded, squeezing her hand gently. I'll keep trying. For you, for them, for us, if you'll ever let there be an us again. The cicadas filled the silence as Celine leaned back, her hand still resting in his. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was a step, a fragile bridge between who they were and who they could become. That night, as the stars blinked above them, they stayed outside longer than ever before. They didn't rush into passion, didn't pretend the past had vanished. Instead, they allowed themselves a quiet intimacy, one built not on desire, alone, but on apology, forgiveness, and the cautious spark of hope. When Donovan finally stood to leave, Celine didn't stop him. But as he reached the bottom step, she whispered his name. He turned, and in her eyes he saw something he hadn't seen in years. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. And that was enough to keep him coming back. Months passed, and slowly patterns formed. Donovan no longer appeared at Celine's door as a guest trying to prove himself. He became a steady presence. He showed up for school plays, arriving early to sit in the crowded auditorium, clapping, louder than anyone when Nova strutted across the stage as a tree in her class production. He crouched in the grass to take pictures of Nia at her first soccer game, cheering even when she missed the ball. Celine watched carefully, waiting for the moment he would slip, the moment his effort would fade into excuses. But that moment never came. Donovan was consistent. If he said he would be there, he was there. If he promised to help, he helped. He wasn't perfect. He still fumbled with braids and burned dinner the night he tried to cook for the girls, but he laughed at his mistakes and kept trying. The girls grew attached to him in ways Celine hadn't expected. Nova, bold and adventurous, often climbed onto his back, declaring him her horse as he crawled across the living-room floor. Nia, quieter but no less loving, began curling into his lap with her favourite books, trusting him with her bedtime stories. They didn't know the weight of the past. They only knew that this man showed up for them, and that was enough. One evening, after the twins had fallen asleep, Celine stepped onto the porch where Donovan sat sipping tea. She studied him quietly. His once perfectly polished image had softened. He wasn't the untouchable CEO here. He was a man learning how to be present. "You've surprised me," she said finally. He looked up, eyebrows raised. "Is that a good thing?" Celine crossed her arms, though her tone lacked the sharpness it once carried. "It's a real thing. I didn't think you had this in you. Consistency, humility, patience." Donovan smiled faintly. "I didn't know I had it either, but they bring it out of me." "You bring it out of me." Her chest tightened at his words. She had promised herself never to be swayed by charm again, and yet what she saw in him now wasn't charm. It was growth. "I'm not the same woman you left," she said firmly. "I don't need you to save me, Donovan. I built this life on my own. With or without you, I'll keep standing." He nodded, his expression serious. "I know. And that's what makes me want to stay. Not to rescue you, but to walk beside you. If you'll let me." The silence stretched between them, not tense this time, but thoughtful. Celine searched his face for traces of the man who once wounded her, and though the scars would never vanish, she saw someone new, someone softened by loss, reshaped by effort, and humbled by the weight of fatherhood. She didn't give him an answer that night, nor the next. Instead, she watched. She measured his consistency against the years of absence, and slowly the scales began to balance. The real turning point came weeks later, on a rainy afternoon. Nova had fallen and scraped her knee. Donovan was there, kneeling in the mud without hesitation, holding her steady as she cried. He cleaned the wound clumsily but carefully, whispering reassurances until she stopped trembling. When he carried her back inside, Celine saw it clearly. This was no performance. This was a father loving his daughter. That evening, as she tucked Nova into bed, Celine realized something she had fought to deny. She no longer felt anger toward Donovan. The resentment that once burned like fire had cooled into something else, peace. Later, sitting on the porch, she turned to him. "You've changed," she said softly. Donovan exhaled, his eyes meeting hers. "I had to. Losing you, losing them before I even knew them. It forced me to see what really matters." Celine studied him for a long moment, then reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. This time she didn't pull back. Their story hadn't erased the past. The scars remained, reminders of words that once cut too deep. But in the present, they found something worth holding on to, a chance to rebuild. Not from wealth or pride, but from humility, consistency and love. And as the twins' laughter filled the house behind them, Celine finally allowed herself to breathe. Not as the woman who had been called Barren, but as the mother who had proven otherwise, and as a woman strong enough to let healing take root. Words can wound deeper than silence. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it can build a future. True love isn't measured in wealth or status, but in presence, patience, and respect. Donovan Hale learned too late that pride destroys, but just in time that love, when guarded and nurtured, can be rebuilt. Donovan Hale once believed success was measured in numbers. He thought the worth of a man was found in bank accounts, in buildings carrying his name, in contracts, signed and sealed with profit. But life showed him a truth he could not ignore. Wealth without love is hollow. Power without presence is meaningless. The night he called Celine Barren became the moment he defined, not her, but himself. It revealed his arrogance, his blindness, his inability to see the woman who had stood beside him through every failure and every rise. He thought his word was final, but life had another story to write. Celine proved that strength is not in titles or applause, but in rebuilding when the world tells you you're broken. She left with nothing but her will to survive, and she returned with everything she was. Told she could never have 2 beautiful daughters who became her reason to breathe. Her silence was not weakness, it was resilience. When fate brought them back together, Donovan stood face to face with the consequences of his pride. He learned that forgiveness is not given with ease, nor should it be. Celine did not fall back into his arms. She made him earn every moment, every inch of trust. And it was in the slow process, braiding Nova's hair poorly, fumbling with Nia's puzzles, kneeling in the mud to comfort a scraped knee, that Donovan found the meaning of love. The lesson is simple, but it is one many forget, and words carry weight. Once spoken, they cannot be taken back. When forgiveness does not erase the past, but it can open the door to a new future. Love is not proven in gifts or status, but in showing up, day after day, without excuse. Celine stood tall, no longer the woman defined by his cruelty, but the mother defined by her strength. Donovan humbled himself, no longer the man worshipped for his wealth, but the father respected for his presence. Their story reminds us all that redemption is possible, but only when paired with humility, consistency, and genuine change. So to you, watching this story unfold, ask yourself, what words have you spoken that left scars? What apologies have you left unspoken? And what changes must you make to prove that your love is real? Because in the end, Donovan Hale discovered something no fortune could buy. The greatest wealth is not money. The greatest wealth is family, and the fight to keep it. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who has been broken but is still standing. Someone who believes their story is over but hasn't yet seen the miracles waiting on the other side of pain. And don't forget, subscribe to Mr. Ashford's Love Stories for more unforgettable tales that remind us of the power of love, the cost of pride, and the beauty of second chances. Because here, every story carries a lesson, and every lesson has the power to change a life.